Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, July the 31st, 2024. So, what is the holy grail of the astrologer? Well, from a material perspective, the holy grail of the astrologer is perhaps to be able to use astrology to work out what the markets are going to do, to work out what the stock market is going to do, what individual shares are going to do, use astrology in terms of commodities like gold and silver and wheat. And then it's easy, isn't it? You create a system and you make money. Now, in this video, I want to look at how I might use astrology to make forecasts about the stock market. But if I had really worked out a system for using astrology to make money on the markets, I wouldn't be making this video. I'm sorry, I would not. I would be keeping it to myself. I mean, I'm not supposed to say that, but I'm supposed to be a sort of humanitarian, non-materialistic person. But if I'd really worked it out, I wouldn't be talking about it. So what I'm really saying is it's probably not a holy grail. To think that you can actually use astrology in a systematic way to make money on the stock market, I suspect is a fantasy. Now, you may be able to use it in unison with other systems. For example, technical analysis, you might be looking at graphs or you might be looking at news flow. So you might be able to do that, but it's probably not realistic. Although astrologers have put a huge amount of effort into cracking the stock market for the last century and more. This has been a major preoccupation of astrologers. I don't know about astrologers recently, but certainly when I was studying astrology, there was a lot of talk about astrology in the markets. And I think there was even the odd TV show which showed astrologers being consulted, TV drama in the 80s, which showed astrologers being consulted in a secretive way to work out what the markets were doing. So what I want to do in this video is just look at how one might go about using astrology to make stock market predictions. But don't expect anything dramatic. As I've said, if it really worked, I wouldn't be talking about it. But I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it simply is too hit and miss, I think, to be part of a system. And actually using astrology to work out the markets may be a recipe for financial ruin. That is certainly possible. And I will also be looking at what's going on right now from an astrological point of view. Are there any astrological hints that something's happening in the markets? But just do remember, this is not a channel for giving financial advice. I'm not giving financial advice here. This video is for entertainment purposes only. Okay, so before I look at astrology and the markets, I want to consider what's happening today from the viewpoint of astrology and the I Ching. And today is Wednesday, July the 31st, 2024. It is the last day of July. And here we have the position of the planets. Top right is that famous statue in New York representing the bull market, a market where everyone is optimistic. And so looking at today, so this is the horoscope for today, set for noon. And I don't think very much is happening. We've got the moon in late Gemini. It is applying to a sextile of Venus, and it's just made a square to Saturn. So really we've got Moon square Saturn, and then the Moon is going on to make a sextile of Venus. And that's pretty much it. So the Moon it's in Gemini. That's quite a sort of talkative, thinking place for the Moon to be in. Very much relating to the cerebral side of things, and we have perhaps got a lot to say. Perhaps we also don't want to take things too seriously, though we can't avoid the fact that the Moon is making a square to Saturn. Now, this Saturn, I've just started putting a Black Moon Lilith on my charts. One of the reasons I put Black Moon Lilith is on these charts is just to give myself an idea about what it's doing. And perhaps it's a good way for us to sort of track its movement. And at the moment, we've got Saturn opposition Black Moon Lilith, a true Black Moon Lilith this is. Moon is square Saturn, Moon is square Black Moon Lilith. So if you're into Black Moon Lilith, we've kind of got a T-square here, haven't we? Moon square Saturn, Moon square Black Moon Lilith. Now, Saturn opposition Black Moon Lilith, remember Princess Diana had Saturn opposition Black Moon Lilith, and so does King Charles III. So I don't know to what extent Charles III resonates to the Saturn Black Moon Lilith cycle. But perhaps with the Moon square Saturn, square Black Moon Lilith, maybe a difficult day for Prince Charles. Who knows? Prince Charles, sorry, it's King Charles now, isn't it? I keep on thinking he's still the prince, isn't it? Okay, so with Moon square Saturn, Moon square Black Moon Lilith, there may be some darkness at some time during the day. Perhaps being afraid of something. Although, if Saturn is opposition Black Moon Lilith, it is arguably conjunct the perigee degree, which, according to some people, is White Moon Selena. But there are other views of White Moon Selena. The whole issue of what is White Moon Selena is, there is an argument here, or not an argument, but they are two completely different points, depending on your view. But if you're logical about it, White Moon Selena is arguably the point of the Moon's perigee, as Black Moon Lilith is a point of the Moon's apogee. Apogee being where the Moon is furthest away from the Earth. The perigee is a place where it's nearest to the Earth. So at the moment, Saturn is close to the point where the Moon is nearest to the Earth. And some people might call that point White Moon Selena. Other people would say that White Moon Selena is something completely different. But I don't want to get too involved in that controversy. So perhaps with Saturn close to the perigee point, with the Moon picking it up, if it's close to the perigee point, then perhaps there's a sense of obligation here. We need to do something which emphasizes the light. We need to perhaps shine light into darkness through hard work, through just taking something seriously, perhaps taking something seriously that other people are not taking seriously, and we're not afraid of it. And we can perhaps lighten something up. At least that's one view. But anyway, the Moon is making a square to Saturn and is making a square to Black Moon Lilith. So there could be some issues here, having to deal with frustration, having to perhaps deal with the darkness of humanity. But the Moon does move on to make a sextile to Venus. Moon sextile Venus is a very nice aspect. It's about getting on with people. Moon in Gemini, Venus in Leo. Okay, it's not an especially emotional sextile, but it's nice. We've got things to say, and we can relate to people on a basic level. We don't need to get too close to people to actually get on with them. And another aspect happening today is the Sun is quintile Uranus. So there is the Sun, there is Uranus. So Sun and Uranus are approximately 72 degrees apart. So 72 degrees is 1/5 of the circle. So if you've got Sun quintile Uranus, that means that we're trying to bring the Sun and Uranus together in a quintile aspect. Quintiles are about what we are trying to create. They may often be about style. So with Sun quintile Uranus, many of us are trying to do something different, and we're trying to make an impression. And the Sun in Leo wants attention, wants to be taken seriously. And so it may be that we feel that we have to make a special effort to make things happen, to do something dramatic. And that's fine, provided we're not too forced about it. And perhaps we have to think about ourselves first. How do we make ourselves special on our own terms without having to bother other people? Because we don't want to be a super extrovert just for the sake of it. That could just be annoying. So if you do want to create change and do things differently, go ahead, but try not to be too exaggerated about it. Now, if you are in the Americas, then this evening the moon does move into Cancer. That movement in New York, I think, takes place at around 11:19 p.m. So it's very late today, and I would have said probably you should regard it as being a feature of tomorrow, the moon moving into Cancer. If you are on the west coast of America, Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon, in Vancouver, whether you're Vancouver, Washington, or Vancouver, British Columbia, if you are in the west coast, then the moon does move into Cancer at 8:19 p.m. Might still be too late to do much about it. As far as I can see, Americans go to bed relatively early compared to, for example, people in the UK. So it's probably too late. But if you are a night owl, if you're, I don't know what you're doing this evening, if you're out partying or going to meetings, gatherings, talking to people, whatever you're doing, I suppose spending time with your family, the moon moving into Cancer does bring about a change. Less emphasis on the mind and talking, and perhaps more emphasis on feeling, and perhaps being more sort of home orientated. But then it's Wednesday evening. I suppose that's what people do in the evening. They do become more home orientated. So perhaps that's just stating the obvious. But I'll talk more about moon in Cancer tomorrow when moon is in Cancer for everyone. Tomorrow will of course be August the 1st. So looking at the heliocentric picture, which I haven't seen before, I probably should make a better effort to prepare myself. Venus is opposition Saturn. Now, that Venus opposition Saturn was exact a day or two ago, so it's losing strength. But I suppose it's still there. And we have to remember that geocentrically the moon is square Saturn today. So it kind of gives us more of the same. It does emphasize the fact that there is a Saturnine feel today. Geocentrically, moon square Saturn. Maybe it's difficult to relate emotionally. Venus opposition Saturn. Heliocentrically, again, we may feel that we can't fully relate to people at an emotional level. So it's not a very strong influence. And probably if you're in California and moon goes into Cancer this evening, I think that will probably cancel it out, but still, don't spend too much time trying to relate emotionally today, because it might be hard work. You might not be in the mood for revealing your feelings. Other people might not be in the mood. And as I said yesterday, Venus opposition Saturn can be a little bit transactional. Seeing relationships in terms of what they can do for us, not just being with someone and being happy, just thinking all the time about how are you going to benefit from it, how are they going to benefit from me. So that could be a bit of a problem. Now, another aspect happening heliocentrically is Mercury trine Mars. So you can see that Mercury, in fact, it's more than that. Mercury is trine Mars. It's square Neptune. So Mercury is square Neptune and it's trine Mars. So that is perhaps a little difficult, because on one hand you've got Mercury square Neptune. So Mercury square Neptune, people can get confused, and communications can get confused. And I don't know, Neptune. I mean, by the way, just notice that some water event in Paris has had to be cancelled or had to be postponed because of pollution in the Seine. The Seine is a river going through Paris. And I mean, that squares with Neptune square the ascendant at the time of the opening of the Paris Olympics. And here we've got Mercury square Neptune. So I suppose Mercury square Neptune is a sort of global event, isn't it? Mercury square Neptune perhaps relates to a global event like the Paris Olympics. So water is a problem. There can be miscommunications about water. If you're traveling by water, there can be problems. And I sort of warned about that yesterday. And in fact, it seems to be happening actually in Paris in terms of things connected with the water. So we'll see how that goes. And Mercury is also trine Mars. So Mercury trine Mars, people are quite keen to say what's on their mind. It's very communicative, and maybe people will get verbally annoyed quite quickly, and that's sort of linked with the fact that Mars is in Gemini. So Mars is in Gemini geocentrically. Mercury is trine Mars heliocentrically. So yeah, there's a lot of verbal action. Some of it might be useful, but you might just get people just talking for the sake of it, and just being verbally angry for the sake of it without necessarily achieving much. Mercury trine Mars, it is a trine, just things happen easily, the words come easily, and it just could get to be a little bit difficult. I mean, that is certainly possible. Okay, that is the heliocentric picture, and I now want to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, July the 31st, 2024. Aries. Aries, you continue to have quite a lot to say for yourself. I mean, the moon is in Gemini, and so with the moon in Gemini, Aries, there are things on your mind, things you want to talk about, and you'd like people to hear about them. And it's not just that, because we've just looked at the heliocentric picture, and heliocentrically, Mercury is trine Mars. So with Mercury trine Mars, I think that you just may find that you want to put a lot of energy into communication, just getting your message across. And I do think that you will be effective, but it just may not be quite how you want. You'd like to get a fast response. Something's bothering you, something's bothering you, something's on your mind, you just want to talk about it, and you expect action. I don't really think you can expect action. The moon is maybe in Gemini, but it is square Saturn. And that square Saturn is going to be especially important if you are in Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand. If you're in the Americas, maybe not so important, but certainly if you're outside the Americas, you just may feel that it's just a little bit difficult to say what's on your mind in the way you want. And it may be that you're just getting resistance. It may actually be your own unconscious fears. Yeah, you've got lots to say. You've got tons of things to say, but something does seem to be holding you back. And you just feel, is this really the right thing to be doing? And you just kind of perhaps have cold feet at a certain point. So that might suggest that the ideal way to talk, to communicate, is to firstly understand who you're dealing with and also understand yourself. You yourself have your own limits. There are certain places you don't want to go to. There are certain things you don't want to talk about. You kind of might like to talk about them, but you don't really want to talk about them. So there's a bit of a difference there. And there may be some unconscious resistance there. And perhaps the aspect you should be focusing on is a sextile aspect between the Moon and Venus. So that sextile aspect between the Moon and Venus is the last major aspect the Moon makes before leaving the sign. Sure, it makes us before leaving Gemini. Sure, it does make a square to Neptune, but that's an outer planet. But in a way, that doesn't really count. And so, with this Moon sextile Venus, a bit of sensitivity and understanding can actually go a long way. And if you've got something important to say to someone, the first thing you need to do is to get their trust. You can be likable if you want to be. And if you come over as being a nice person, you get people to trust you, then you're able to get to grips with things, and the words will start to flow, and you will be able to really get your message across, and people will understand what you're talking about, and your dynamism will be accepted and perhaps appreciated as well. And we can follow this through with Moon sextile Venus. In fact, if you make an effort to be nice and to listen as well as to talk, then I think that people will really start to like you. And you have the opportunity to sort of bring people together. So it's almost like saying, if you've got something to say, your first job is to sort out your audience. And so you perhaps have to bring your audience together before you're really able to communicate. Now, this Moon sextile Venus may also be linked to relationships. Venus, is ruler of Libra, your opposite sign. And so with Moon sextile Venus, I think that with the right words, you can really get on with people, and you can strengthen relationships in perhaps a big way. And so maybe what happens is that right at the beginning of the day, you just feel that nothing much is happening, that your efforts are not being successful, but you keep trying and you make a special effort to be sensitive. And in the end, you really do start to hit the mark. And once you understand what's required of you and you start bringing people into your orbit, then things really start to move. Taurus. Venus continues to be trine Chiron. I talked about Venus trine Chiron yesterday, but actually today is the day when Venus is, in many respects, going to be hit most by that trine to Chiron. Now that might not seem obvious, because the exact Venus trine Chiron was yesterday, but we have to consider what the moon is doing. So today the moon is sextile Chiron and the moon is sextile Venus. So with those two aspects, I think that you really are in a position to kind of utilize that Chiron energy, whatever that Chiron energy might actually mean. So Chiron is perhaps about helping people, being of assistance. And if anyone has got a problem or a wound, even, I mean, not necessarily a physical wound, but if someone's got something wrong, that they need something wrong with them, I mean, I'm not talking, again, I must make it clear, I'm not talking about anything particularly clinical, but you're certainly capable of being of assistance. And, you know, people have many different worries and concerns. Now, it may actually be that some people have financial issues. A lot of people have got financial problems at the moment, and perhaps there's something you can do. Something you can do does not mean giving them money. It perhaps means using your wisdom. You know, Taurus is quite a financially orientated sign, and I think in many cases you've got some good financial advice to offer. And at the same time, when it comes to money, you're able to look at things in a different way, in a way that is slightly unexpected, even unconventional. But your ideas about money can be useful, not just to other people, but I think in terms of yourself. Obviously, you've got to be careful what you do with money, but with Moon in Gemini sextile Chiron, you have your own way of looking at things, and sometimes your own way of looking at things can be very profitable. Now, the moon, while it's in a Gemini, is making a square to Saturn. Now that's especially the case beginning of the day, especially the case if you're in the old world, if you're not in the Americas, but I think even in the Americas you'll pick it up to some extent. But with the moon square Saturn, some Taurians may have certain concerns about money. If you start to think about money, then you may start to be a little concerned about it. Yeah, sure, you can give good financial advice, but that doesn't mean to say that you're relaxed about money. I don't think you are. I think that you're aware of what is holding you back, and you may feel that, you know, even if you've got money, even if you've made money recently, it's somehow not enough, and that you're not going to be able to do everything you want. And even if you've had a recent financial gain, this gain may itself be under threat, because perhaps you've got many calls on your money. You've got to give money to this person, that person, this organization, and it's kind of a little bit overwhelming. And that moon square Saturn may give you pause for thought. But moon square Saturn, it does move on, and it does make a sextile to Saturn. Sorry, the moon makes a sextile to Venus. So with moon sextile Venus, you really do have an opportunity to sort things out, and I think that could be extremely useful. And it's, I suppose, all about the fundamentals of things. Yeah, money is so fundamental, and you really appreciate that. And so if something isn't clear financially, if you're not quite sure how you're going to pay a particular bill or a series of bills, now might be the time to sort of use your talents and your abilities to actually work out what needs to be done, how money needs to be reorganized. That is something to consider. I know it's boring thinking about money, but I think that there is a financial emphasis today which really can't be ignored. Gemini. The moon is continuing to move through your sign, which I think is good news. And I do think that it is going to be a useful day. So when I was talking to Aries and Taurus, I was mentioning the fact that the moon is making a square to Saturn. And moon square Saturn is often seen as being quite a difficult aspect. I mean, moon is trying to express itself, and it just runs into Saturn, and Saturn kind of stops it in its tracks. But for you, I think the moon square Saturn should be fine. I think that the moon square Saturn is going to give you structure and focus, and you will just know what needs to be done. And I think that your sense of self-discipline is going to be really good. You know, Geminis can sometimes have discipline issues, particularly mental discipline. I don't know. As a Gemini, once my mind wanders, I often wonder whether at some level perhaps I have attention deficit disorder. I suppose that is a Gemini thing. It's not helped by computers, but Geminis can be distracted, and this square between moon and Saturn is going to be useful. It's going to help you be focused. So do make the most of it. And if there's something you want to do and it's important, then you can do it. And you do not have to be distracted. And if there are distractions, I do think that you will just know how to deal with them. So the moon, having made this sextile to Saturn, square to Saturn, it makes a sextile to Venus, and that moon sextile Venus is, I would have said, pretty fortunate, Gemini. I think moon sextile Venus, you're going to be pretty good at talking. People are going to like you, and I think in general you're just going to know what to say. You're not going to have to think about it too much, and you may be able to talk to people who in the past, or at least the recent past, you haven't been able to talk to. Maybe you haven't been able to talk to. Maybe there's perhaps been a misunderstanding, or simply there's never been the opportunity. Well, now is the opportunity to talk about things, to talk about perhaps what you and another person have in common. So that's perhaps something you can do. And I actually think in today it's a time when you can renew and even transform some of the relationships around you. Not necessarily close relationships, just all of this network of relationships around you, people you see all the time, and you perhaps got rather used to it, but actually today you can change things. Maybe it's about saying something you wouldn't normally say. It's perhaps you have a very basic conversation with someone every single day, and it follows a script. Hello, good morning, how are you? I'm fine, or something like that. But today you can actually go beyond the regular conversation, and you can make it sort of more intense and more meaningful. And by talking more than usual to someone you don't normally talk to, or you normally just talk to on a very basic level, you can actually create some kind of transformation. And I think that is something that Geminis really should be trying to focus on. Now, one other thing is that today Saturn is opposition Black Moon Lilith, opposition true Black Moon Lilith. I mean, okay, when I say today, I'm not saying it's just today, but they are in opposition aspect. And the moon picks up on both. So the moon is square Saturn, moon is square Black Moon Lilith. And this perhaps reminds you that nothing is entirely simple. And, Black Moon Lilith is in Virgo. And so with Black Moon Lilith in Virgo, there could be things lurking from the past, perhaps from a deep past, and they perhaps need to be addressed because they're not going to go away on their own, and they might fester. So memories and resentments from the past may be festering, and these memories and resentments from the past may actually be preventing you from moving forward. And so with the moon in Gemini making square to Saturn, square to Black Moon Lilith, the square to Black Moon Lilith is perhaps about addressing things, and maybe that's also what communication is about. I've talked about communication, moon sextile Venus. So moon, you could say that moon moves from a square to Black Moon Lilith to a sextile with Venus. So maybe if you want to banish the demons, banish these dark forces, you perhaps have to talk about them. Talking about things can actually make things a lot easier and can, I won't say make things go away, but make things more comprehensible, and you can perhaps bring things into the sunlight, and that might be a useful thing to do. Cancer. So Cancer, I've just been talking about Moon and Saturn and Black Moon Lilith, and Moon is your planet. Okay, I know the moon is technically not a planet, it's a satellite, but the moon is making aspects to, it's making a square to Saturn, it's making a square to true Black Moon Lilith, and it's also making a sextile to Venus. And I suppose these aspects may have an impact on you. Now, the moon is currently moving through Gemini, and so you're getting ready for the moon to move into your sign, but it's not really there yet. Okay, if you're in the Americas, moon moves into Cancer this evening, but I think it kind of moves into Cancer just too late in most cases for you to do anything with it. Okay, unless you happen to be having a really busy evening, Cancer, I just don't think that you're going to be fully able to benefit from this movement into Cancer. So I think you still have to regard today as being a sort of moon in Gemini day. And of course, Gemini is the sign before Cancer, and it is a sign in the Cancerian chart that is to an extent associated with introspection, holding back, and with moon in Gemini, there are probably things on your mind, things you're perhaps trying to work through, and I think you just may be aware of certain things which could hold you back, that could perhaps hold you back in the future. And okay, that's more the case if you're East, if you're in the old world, if you're in Europe, Asia, and certainly Australia and New Zealand, because it does depend on time zones. If you are in the Americas, then moon square Saturn, moon square Black Moon Lilith is to an extent really taking place really early in the day. I mean, last night it's done, but I don't think it's done if you're in the old world. So with this moon square Saturn, moon square Black Moon Lilith, you're going to feel a certain amount of restriction. There may be something just holding you up. You could still feel it in the Americas to an extent, but I just don't think it's going to be quite as strong as if you're on the other side of the Atlantic or the other side of the Pacific. Just as something is not quite moving your way, and you may also take the view that you and someone else aren't exactly on the same wavelength. After all, Moon is ruler of Cancer, Saturn is ruler of Capricorn, your opposite sign. So when you've got Moon square Saturn, you are just aware of some of the things that could be holding you back. As many of these things are sort of unconscious. They're not actually to do with what's holding you back in the real world. And with Moon square Black Moon Lilith, that could be about your fears. You know, the Cancer is obviously a very moon-orientated sign. It's ruled by Moon, and so I suppose Moon square Black Moon Lilith at a time when the Moon is also square Saturn, you may just have to confront things that really are perhaps a little bit difficult, kind of might be somewhat emotional and might relate to the past. You know, Cancerians have an incredible memory. You know, all things being equal, Cancerians probably have the best memory of all the 12 signs, all things being equal. And Cancerians don't forget, and Cancerians don't forgive. So if something has happened in the past, it might be real right now, and you're just holding on to it very tightly. Perhaps, Cancer, you should just let it go. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on this Moon square Saturn, Moon square Black Moon Lilith, because the Moon is making a sextile to Venus, and this Moon sextile Venus is, you know, it's the last aspect, the last major aspect, using traditional planets, that the Moon makes before leaving the sign, before moving into Cancer. So that Moon sextile Venus is really very pleasant, and I think that after a bit of a struggle, I think that you find that there are people who you can relate to quite well, and I think your social skills are going to be good, but somewhat understated. You're not going to make a big effort to be sociable. You are going to, you know, try to keep yourself to yourself. But if you are socializing, if you are with people, you'll just know how to make a good impression. It will just be very easy. And it might actually be, Cancer, a good time to be talking about money. You know, money is always a difficult problem, isn't it? And talking about money, and you don't want to talk about money. But you know, Cancerians, you know, of all people, understand that money is important. I mean, Cancer is a very security-orientated sign. But if the money needs to be talked about, then now, today, might be a good time to do it. Or perhaps tomorrow, if you're in, for example, Australia or New Zealand, because that Moon sextile Venus is somewhat dependent on time zone. But anyway, if there's a financial issue that needs to be discussed, then I think really for all of us now might be really the time to take the bull by the horns. I might as well use that sort of metaphor, given I've got a bull on this video. So overall, Cancer, there could be moments when you're a little bit unsure of yourself, when you're dealing from things from the past, but as you move forward, things will start to get better. As you move away from the square of Saturn, as you move towards the Moon sextile Venus, the day will just get better and better as it goes along, I think. Leo, there's all sorts of things going on in some respects. I mean, we start with the Sun. Sun is your ruler, as you know, the sun is in a great position. It's in Leo. The sun likes being in Leo, and the sun is making a trine to the nodes, the north node to the north node, and it's making a sextile to the south node, because the north and south nodes, they are an axis. So with the sun trine the north node, I think that it should be quite easy for you to recognize what you're supposed to be doing. That is what the north node really is about. It is what you're supposed to be doing. The south node, in a way, is what you're supposed not to be doing. It's kind of easier to do what the south node tells you to do rather than the north node. But with the sun trine north node, it is a time when you're able to make connections, I think. Start to understand the way things are put together. And so perhaps we can start to put this trine sextile together. So maybe with the north node the south node in Libra, sextile the sun. The south node is about factual details, really, just looking at all these facts, and also looking at all of the ways in which you relate to other people. Because South Node in Libra, it's quite sociable. It's the way people connect with each other, and so you can be overwhelmed by all these details. And there's a tendency to just focus on the minutiae of how people relate to one another. But because the sun is sextile the south node and making a trine to the north node, you can move from one way of viewing things to another way. Yeah, sure, you've got all this information and you're concerned about whether you're offending someone, or whether it's the right thing to do. But then, sun trine the north node, you start to see the big picture. You start to see what it's all about. And the north node is in Aries. It's about connections. It's about just seeing the truth of the matter. North node is in a fire sign. Sun is in a fire sign. You see the truth of the matter and you just go beyond the details. And that's the kind of day it should be. Yeah, sure, you might spend a bit of time thinking and analysing, but you go beyond that and you have clarity, and there just may be a moment of inspiration where really it all comes together. And in the process, you can take the good with the bad. And that is quite important. At the moment, sure, it's true that you do understand where the problems lie. You understand the darkness of other people. You understand the sleazy and seamy. What's the word? It's not quite criminal. It's almost criminal, but the dark underside of life. You get it all. You can see it, and perhaps in the recent past you'll be worrying about it. Just worrying that it's a terrible world you're living in. There are some bad people out there, bad actors. But now it's just all part of the same thing. You can just see the world for what it is. All these different characters, some of them good, some of them bad. I suppose the good, the bad, and the ugly. You can see it all, and you get the picture. And as a result of that, you start to have an understanding of where your place is. And place is important. You have your role, you have your niche, and you understand what that niche is. And when you're in the right niche, you can get the balance right between, looking after yourself and making sure your boundaries are in order, but also being able to reach beyond your immediate horizons. And you are, I think, further helped by the fact that, the moon is in Gemini, late Gemini. It's making a very nice aspect to Venus. And so as the moon applies to a sextile of Venus, you just feel an increasing sense of belonging and understanding. And because of that fundamental intuitive understanding, it just feels like you can't really do anything too badly wrong, because just intuitively you just understand it all, and it all makes sense. And if you follow your intuition, then I really don't see what can go wrong. Virgo, you continue to be seeking quite a high profile for yourself. It's like what I was talking about yesterday. I mentioned that you are in your own way quite ambitious, and you're not entirely happy with the way things are right now. You do appreciate that things could be better. Not hugely better, but just better. And so a lot of your efforts perhaps are going to go into making sure that things are working and that you're able to project yourself onto the world. So it should be straightforward, but the day may start off on quite a difficult note, because the moon is in Gemini, but it is making a square to Saturn. And so with the moon square Saturn, some Virgos, especially if they're in Australia, New Zealand, Asia, just may feel that they are somewhat being held back. And you just might feel that someone else is holding you back, or perhaps responsibilities to another person are preventing you from doing what you want to do. Now, you might regard this as being something of it's like someone from outside just causing problems for you, and you might feel a general sense of injustice. But alternatively, it might be about perceptions. You might perceive that someone or some situation is holding you back, and perhaps you don't need to work with this perception, and you just need to understand perhaps that you yourself don't want to move forward. There's just something holding you back, and if someone is presenting a few reasons why you shouldn't move forward, you're perhaps exaggerating them. You're regarding them as an absolute block on future activity, and that's really not how you should see it. Another thing to consider is the fact that the moon is not just making a square to Saturn, it is also making a square to Black Moon Lilith. So with moon square Black Moon Lilith, that's perhaps a hint that you're having to deal with maybe your own darkness. We're supposed to live in the light, but we all have things going on in our own unconscious. We all have dark thoughts. We all actually have horrible thoughts, don't we? And perhaps this is something that you are somewhat aware of, and maybe it requires some thinking and a little bit of reflection. And do consider your own behavior. With the moon square Black Moon Lilith, Black Moon Lilith can manifest in strange ways, and you might actually be doing things which don't help, which are perhaps reflecting your own darkness, your own negativity, your own perhaps unconscious desire to make things worse. So it's an unconscious thing, but just be aware. And I think if you're self-aware, then you'll be fine. Now, the moon, having made this square to Saturn and this square to Black Moon Lilith, it moves on and it makes a sextile to Venus. And really, that's how the day ends. Moon sextile Venus, in fact, moon sextile Chiron. So with moon sextile Venus, I think it's a time when you can be more relaxed and just have a quiet satisfaction that you've done enough and that you don't have to be involved in any form of power struggle. And perhaps there are a few negotiations that are required. Depends on what you're doing. Maybe that's not appropriate, not negotiations aren't relevant. But in certain cases, some negotiations may be useful. Perhaps a kind of negotiation that requires a little bit of secrecy, where you need to be able to discuss some of your ideas and your plans with another person. You have to listen to what they've got to say, and there might be just an atmosphere of secrecy where this is not something that you want to tell the wider world what you're doing. So if there are opportunities to negotiate in a very serious and sincere kind of way, then Virgo, I think you should take these opportunities, because I think they could turn out to be very useful. Libra. I think Libra, things are looking good, provided you don't take yourself too seriously. I say this because right now, Libra, you just may be inclined to push things too hard. At least some Librans might. You might just take the view that life is difficult, that there are obstacles in front of you, and you can't get what you want, and that maybe the only way to make progress is to use huge amounts of force. Maybe you got this force available. Maybe you can put huge amounts of force into achieving what you want to do. In which case, yes, sure, I suppose you can make progress, but what about the damage? Or you might feel you don't have a force, and then you just might feel rather frustrated, and you just might get just angry that you're not able to accomplish everything you want to accomplish. So there is a danger there, and I do think it's a matter of perception. I don't think we're necessarily talking about anything real, or something that is perhaps superficially real. On the surface, you see things that could be holding you back, and you might start to take them seriously, and it's just going to be more trouble than it's worth. And instead, what you should do is, Libra, is just focus on what's good, focus on what's working. And today the moon is applying to a sextile of Venus. I mean, moon sextile Venus is a very nice aspect, and with moon sextile Venus, there is a great sense of harmony. You just feel that things are working. You can feel that things are working. Okay, you might at first sight feel that things are not working, and you might just assume a conflict. But actually, when you make the effort to look at what's going on, when you start to try something out, when you give people a chance, I mean, it's really very important to give people a chance. When you start to give people a chance, then I do think that things will start working, and I think you'll be very satisfied with the way things are going, and you'll also be helped, I believe, by really the very constructive attitude of other people. And sure, you have to make your choices, and you can't be friends with everyone, but if you make your choices, you will find that things do run very well. Just don't be put off by perhaps what happens at the beginning of the day. Just at the beginning of the day, it just might feel that there are things holding you back, that you can't get anything done, that your own worries and fears may be holding you up, and you may have these dark feelings, almost twisted feelings at the beginning of the day, but you just have to get through it and not take them too seriously. It's perhaps you have to not get sidetracked by the creatures of the night, these sort of phantoms that are trying to lure you off the path. You just need to look straight and focus on what is good and what is healthy and is life affirming. And if you can do that, then things are really going to work very well for you. And it's also important that you have strong vision at the moment. You mustn't feel that what is in front of you is all you've got, because that's simply not the case. You need to be aware that there is a world beyond your immediate environment which does need to be explored. I mean, that doesn't mean physically exploring it necessarily, having to travel large distances. It's just about reaching out almost with your unconscious mind, but I suppose you can also work out what's going on by asking questions, by listening to what people have to say, and just exploring things which just are beyond your usual experience. And once you actually realize, what is out there, and also realize that really nothing can hold you back. I know you might think that things are holding you back. You might think that you're being constrained, but you're not being constrained at all. And as soon as you really start to engage with the right situations and hopefully the right people as well, you will get clear evidence here that things are working, things are happening, and that certainly things are moving in the right direction. So overall, Libra, I don't think there's much to be said. I think if you go about it the right way, then I think it looks like being a good day. Scorpio, you do have, I suppose, some choices. And I think it's a similar kind of choices that you had yesterday. The question is, do you want to be out there in the world, or do you not want to be out there in the world? It is a choice. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate that choice too much. I mean, I suppose, isn't it like with the Buddha having the choice whether to reincarnate? I don't think you've moved to that level. You have a choice about reincarnating, have a choice about whether you really want to stay where you are, or whether you want to come down onto this earth one more time and make it a better place. But it's not quite like that. But you can, if you want, Scorpio, just enjoy your own company, not worry too much about what else is going on in the world, and that's fine. That's your choice. You'll be able to do some useful stuff. I'm sure that there is thinking to do. I'm sure there's work to be done. I'm sure there are lots of things that you need to analyze. But, Scorpio, I think that there are things going on in the outside world which I think you can benefit from, and I also think that other people can benefit from you, because at the moment, Scorpio, you've definitely got something to offer. You've got intelligence to offer, but you're also quite serious. You do understand what is important, and if other people are confused or are perhaps taking things too lightly, then I think you do have the ability to sort of bring things back, to put things back in order. So this capacity for good, I think, gets stronger as the day continues. And it's all about the fact that the moon is making a sextile to Venus. I mean, that's a lot of what it is about. And so with moon sextile Venus, you can certainly be serious, and you can be intense, but you can also be very sincere. And because of your sincerity, Scorpio, I just think that people are going to trust you, and they'll be prepared to talk about what's on their mind, and they'll be prepared to listen to you, and they'll be prepared to follow your advice. And if you can do all that, then I think that it's going to have an impact on some of your plans and your ambitions. Because once you're out there and you are talking to people, you're advising people, you're listening to people, that actually improves your overall position. And if you're working or doing business, then I think the position is likely to just get better, because I think it just will be clear that you're the person that knows how to do things the best. So it may actually be a good day for something like a job interview, or if you're trying to get some business, then I think you'll just come over as being someone who is quite serious. At the same time, you'll know what to say. The moon is in Gemini, and you'll be able to talk, but perhaps you'll be able to talk about things that other people aren't talking about. And because you're able to talk about a wide variety of subjects, including subjects that might be a little bit difficult and unpleasant, then I think that's just going to add to your credibility even more. And because you're going to be trusted by many different people in many different quarters. I mean, at least that is a possibility here. Of course, it depends what you're doing. Because you're going to be trusted, then that allows you to bring new people into your orbit. And I think that people are going to be attracted to your personality. Of course, they can only be attracted to your personality if they can actually see your personality. And of course, I understand that Scorpios do like to keep themselves private. It's quite a private sign. And if they can't see who you are, well, then of course it's going to be difficult, isn't it? But if you just give away a little bit, show people the kind of person you are, then I think that you're going to get really good feedback. You're going to get a really good response, and then you might realize that you can actually afford to give a little more away. And of course, you don't have to give everything away, but it's up to you. But you can't be a completely closed book. Though I also should say, if you do not want to be involved with the world out there, if you want to just keep your own counsel, then that's fine. I think that you're going to be able to do useful work, useful things. If you're working at home, for example, and it's something serious you're doing that requires deep thought, deep analysis, then it's going to work out very fine. It's going to work out fine, and you'll be able to do a really good job of it. And in fact, Scorpio, you're going to be able to look at, if you need to, if you feel it's important, you are actually going to be able to look at some quite difficult issues. So if you do find that you are having to deal with difficult things that other people don't want to deal with, then I think you're going to do a really good job, because you are going to be fairly fearless. You're not going to just say, I don't want to know about that because it's too complicated, too painful. No, you're going to be prepared to just go through and really understand what it's all about. And so if you're a Scorpio researcher, then again, it's going to be a good day. And research can happen on several levels. Sometimes research involves talking to people, getting their opinions, interviewing them. That's one form of research. But another form of research is, of course, perhaps the more traditional view of research, just shutting yourself off from the rest of the world and just really getting down to it and really getting to grips with those deep and dark matters that you feel it's important to research. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, it's another day when the moon is in Gemini. Moon is in late Gemini. In fact, if you're in the Americas, it does move into Cancer this evening. But with the moon in Gemini, you do continue to have to consider people. People just cannot be ignored or avoided. And in fact, as I think I was saying yesterday, you can certainly benefit from other people. People are going to be a plus in your life. And so just do always be prepared to, to work out and discover what they have to offer. Because people do have quite a lot to offer if you just give them a chance. But, that doesn't mean to say that you have to do things other people's way. You can be independent, but at the same time, you can spend a lot of time trying to work out, what people are doing and what their motivations are, and I suppose how you can perhaps benefit from them. But Sagittarius, don't be too caught up though on what could go wrong. I think there's a certain tendency perhaps to do that today, Sagittarius. You may feel that there are things that just haven't been fully explained. You've heard the gist of it, but you haven't heard the whole story. And because you might feel that information has been denied to you in the past, you might feel that you simply don't have all the facts. And because you don't have all the facts, it's difficult to proceed. I'm not saying this is going to always be the case, but I think some Sagittarians will just feel a certain sense of caution and perhaps an unwillingness to trust. And I think it's okay not to trust people. I'm not saying trust is a bad thing, but it just may occur to you that, people are very nice and they're useful. You can be useful to them, but perhaps they haven't been telling you everything. So if that is the case, Sagittarius, then I suppose in that typical Sagittarian way, you must make it your business to actually work out what is going on. And you can probably do that just by asking the right questions and just being curious. It's good to be curious today, because if you're curious, you can understand things, and you can have a greater understanding of the risks. There's risks in everything, and I don't think that people are going to feel threatened if you just ask them questions, because I think that your questions will come over as just being curious. You want to know about this, you want to know about that. You don't seem to have any motives, and people will just tell you. And once you've heard enough, you'll be in a position to make the right decisions. So, Sagittarius, I think things are looking quite good, just provided you handle things in the right way. Now, in terms of why there might be this feeling that you can't entirely trust people, it may be the fact that the moon is squaring Black Moon Lilith. So Moon square Black Moon Lilith. Black Moon Lilith is currently in Virgo, in quite a high profile sign in your chart. Now, it stays there for some time. It's not as if this is some new piece of new information, but it's just the fact that right now the moon is square Black Moon Lilith, and it's true Black Moon Lilith, and it's square Saturn. And so with the moon making these two squares, particularly early in the day, that does make you think. It does make you wonder. You can see that, where the light is, where things are clear and there is light and there is transparency, is in places that you know very well, like your own home. Your home is your home. It's your domain. It's a place where you are in control. But in the other place, when you are out there trying to make progress in the world, that's when you can start to see the difficulties. That's where you can start to see the evil, perhaps. Okay, it may be to some extent your imagination, but if you use your Sagittarian intuition, you can see where it is. And it may be the case, Sagittarius, that because people are prepared to trust you and that people are prepared to talk to you, you can get important information about a particular problem, a problem that might relate perhaps to your work or career or your business or something like that. And then it starts to make sense. So if, for example, you're working, and if recently you haven't been able to make as much progress as you would have liked to have made, I think there'll be this insight about what the problem actually is. In extreme cases, it might be that there is simply a bad actor at work. That really is possible. But you mustn't jump to conclusions. But what you can see, Sagittarius, is that through other people, you gain knowledge. And knowledge very much is the way forward. Capricorn, you are, it is true, trying to be well organized. You're trying to make sure that everything is in the right place, and that is good. But sometimes you can misunderstand something. That is possible. You just get an idea and it's wrong. Now, this doesn't normally happen to Capricorns. Capricorns are quite sensible. They're down to earth. They're rational. It's almost impossible to fool a Capricorn. But maybe Capricorn, today, there is some danger that you might be fooling yourself. Now, it's probably not over anything particularly major, but just be aware, Capricorn, that there's just something you may decide today, or you might jump to a conclusion today, and that conclusion may be entirely wrong. And if you were to follow through with this conclusion, you could run into trouble. And be very careful, Capricorn, when dealing with ideas. People have ideas, and some of these ideas might seem very convincing, and you're at least prepared to give these ideas a chance. But if you come across new ideas today, then these ideas might actually be quite regressive. They might not actually be healthy, or rather, it may not be anything wrong with the ideas in themselves, but they may be the wrong ideas for you. So perhaps, Capricorn, it is a very bad day for changing your mind. Again, normally Capricorns don't change their mind. It's a very secure, stable sign, but there may be a temptation to reconsider something. and to consider what someone else is saying. It might be changing your mind about something practical. It could be about changing your mind about something political or philosophical or religious or spiritual, something like that. And people, by the way, who have strong ideas. There are people who have strong ideas, people who articulate strong ideas, things that they really believe in. These are the kinds of people you absolutely should not trust. People bearing interesting messages should probably be ignored. I'm sure you're not gullible. Just because, I don't know, some Mormons knock on your door doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to them. Mormons are pretty harmless usually, aren't they? Sure, by all means listen to them, but I'm not perhaps talking about Mormons, but there may be people with other ideas which are more distressing from Mormonism. And so where there's an idea, there's a danger. So yeah, new ideas should definitely be avoided today. And be very careful about changing your mind. Sometimes it is, of course, necessary to change your mind, but if you're changing your mind because someone else is pressurizing you, then that might be a sure sign that something is wrong. So I'm really sorry to just go on this slightly negative tangent. But, with astrology, I'm just trying to look at things from the worst possible view. That's what I'm supposed to do, because I'm just trying to consider all the things that could happen, good or bad. That's my role, I think. And, it's not all bad. The moon is making a sextile to Venus. It's a very nice sextile to Venus. And that moon sextile Venus, I think will work best if you are not disturbed, or at least you're only being disturbed by people you really trust, are completely trustworthy. And with that moon sextile Venus Capricorn, I think there's a lot of good work, good organization you can do, and perhaps with another person's help, but it's got to be on your terms, completely on your terms. And perhaps that's the key to sorting out today, just being very clear about what your terms are, how you want things done, and don't listen too much to what other people are saying, especially if it contradicts your own core beliefs. But I think the right people are going to be cooperative, and there's a lot you can sort out, especially on a sort of mundane and organizational level. And I suppose I should say that something might be pointed out to you that you hadn't thought of, but it's not about changing your mind. It's just a fact is pointed out to you that you didn't realize, and then you realize it, and then that just makes things a whole lot easier. Perhaps there was something that didn't quite fit together and it didn't make sense, and someone points something out to you, and then it's all very clear. So today, there's a right way of doing it and there's a wrong way, and I think you know what the right way is. And just don't change your mind unless you've worked through it yourself and it really is important to you, and both feet are firmly on the ground, because there's just some danger, Capricorn, as I was saying right at the beginning of this piece, that you get confused and you misunderstand something and you make a mistake. But it's a danger. It's not a probability. It needn't even be a possibility. But my job is to just warn you of things. That's it. Aquarius. Like Capricorn, you may be at risk of making a couple of mistakes today. And Aquarius, you might make those mistakes because there is just something you don't quite understand. It seems obvious. You just take it for granted, but you haven't fully got it. You haven't really got it, and perhaps you just don't ask the right questions. So that is certainly possible. So where might this problem be? Well, this problem might actually be in terms of money. So I think, Aquarius, you have to be very careful with money. And, remember, I'm not giving financial advice here. This video is for entertainment purposes only, but from an entertainment and general interest perspective, just consider the possibility that there might be a danger of making a financial mistake. And it is because you don't understand the underlying details, and it's possible that you're just too ready to listen to another person or listen to other ideas. So if you are about to make a financial decision, I mean, it may be the decision is absolutely fine, but why make it today? You don't have to make it today. You can perhaps make it in a few days' time or next week. It doesn't have to be done today. So it is a time for not allowing yourself to be pushed. You don't want to be pushed, and you don't want to. There shouldn't ideally be dramatic departures from your daily routine. I think that really is quite important. And you might also want to consider how you are enjoying yourself. Enjoyment is important to you at the moment, but sometimes enjoyment can be expensive. And so, with the moon square Saturn, more at the beginning of the day, more if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, but I think all of us may feel it to some extent. With the moon square Saturn, it just may be that you're most vulnerable financially when you're doing things that you enjoy, or you're doing things that you think you enjoy, when your guard is down, when you're putting the precedence, when you're on enjoyment and you don't really want to engage with complicated issues. It's just something you just fundamentally don't want to do. But perhaps you should do it. And taking things further, Aquarius, it just may be a time when you need to ask some fairly deep questions of yourself. You shouldn't be looking for answers straight away. It's more about the questions, and it's just being prepared to make things complicated. I know we don't want things to be complicated. Complications are bad, but perhaps complications can't be avoided, and it's better to accept that things are complicated than to just say, "Oh well, things are simple. It's all easy. Everything's fine." But I just feel I need to just look at perhaps how today might go wrong, but I don't want to be entirely negative. Just as a reminder, a couple of days ago, I was reminding Aquarius that the broad picture, we don't want to focus on one single day, but the broad picture is looking good for Aquarians. Jupiter's in Gemini. Jupiter's in an air sign. It's overall is a good time for you. Pluto is moving into Aquarius. It is a good time for you. It's just that today, right now, it just may be a little bit difficult. But the moon is making a sextile to Venus, and that is happening today. And moon sextile Venus is a fortunate aspect, and quite possibly many astrologers trying to make a forecast for Aquarius for today would just entirely focus on the moon sextile Venus, and maybe I've just been simply too negative. And moon sextile Venus may actually be Aquarius, what the day is all about. And moon is in Gemini, moon is in an air sign, and the moon is in a place that is very spontaneous and creative. And so with moon sextile Venus, well, if you're interested, for example, in relationships, then relationships can work really well because Venus is in Leo, Venus is in your opposite sign. So the relationships you're in, provided they're healthy relationships and you're not with the wrong person, provided they're good, healthy relationship, those relationships should work really well, and you can really enjoy people's company, and they can enjoy your company by the same token. And I suppose if you're looking for a new relationship, moon sextile Venus, you might say, well, there's someone, Venus in Leo, maybe there's someone keen on you, there's someone who finds you interesting, and you have perhaps underestimated how interesting you actually are. And if you show people how spontaneous and fun-loving and innovative you can be, they're really going to like you, and they're going to want to get closer to you. Pisces, I think there is a possibility that today may be a bit difficult at times. I wouldn't have said that today Pisces is, completely amazing, because, the moon is square Saturn. And, Saturn is moving through your sign. So I think you're quite familiar with Saturn moving through Pisces. But with the moon square Saturn, there may be something a little wrong with your attitude. You may not be especially constructive, and you just may want to do things your way. And, I know that Pisces is supposed to be a nice, flexible, easygoing sign, but I wouldn't have said that Pisces is necessarily too easygoing right now with moon square Saturn, and you can hold people back. I think that if you're dealing with your family, for example, you have to be a bit careful, because your influence may actually be quite saturnine. Family members may feel that you are restricting their freedom of action. Now, it may well be the case, but it's necessary for you to restrict someone's freedom of action. It may be the right thing to do, particularly if someone is doing something wrong. So if you feel that it's necessary to be a disciplinarian, then that's great, because you are certainly doing the right thing. But you could be taking things too far. You don't want to try too hard to be in control, because that's really not going to help anyone, is it? And you might lose friends, or your popularity might take a temporary dive. So do be careful how you deal with people, especially in terms of your family and your home. But your home may be a setting for really quite constructive activities, because the moon is sextile Venus. So moon sextile Venus can be about organization, having an idea about how things should be organized, maybe even an aesthetic idea. So having a sense of what looks good, what looks beautiful, and being able to act on that idea and actually to turn it into something that is very real. And this perhaps emphasizes the point that much of your energy right now is going down rather than up. down into what you know, down into what you trust, and also that's reflected in other people. You want people you know and trust. You're not really into adventures at the moment. There is always a time for adventures, but I just don't think that now is the time for adventures. And yes, you want things done in your own way. Though, when you are at home, when you are in your own space, then things can happen, and you might have realizations. And one realization you might have is just a realization about what you can do, and perhaps you'll suddenly realize that you've been wasting quite a lot of time recently, that you've been putting a lot of energy into this thing and that thing and so on, but you haven't really been utilizing everything you've got. There's just something you have that has just been gathering dust. And whatever this thing is that's been gathering dust, it needs to perhaps be recreated and brought back into action. And we might be talking about, well, I suppose it could be a piece of machinery, but it could also just be something about you, something about your personality that you just haven't really been using, but now is perhaps the time is you need to work on it and really start making it work for you, because what you don't want to do is underestimate yourself. But I suppose if you're constantly having to worry about external pressure, then you never have a chance to work on yourself. And so Pisces, maybe now is a great time to be working on yourself, when there is this great emphasis on you and your private world, because it's not going to last forever. Things will change. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. So I'm now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was possession in great measure, number 14. So in many respects, this is the best hexagram in the book. I know one shouldn't really say that about the I Ching, but this is regarded as being a very fortunate hexagram, particularly if one is asking questions about money. So possession in great measure does indicate that we have a lot of things, though it may not be just money. Probably in most cases it isn't just money. It's about our talents, our abilities, what we can do, our friends, certainly our possessions, and all of the things that we have that make us who we are and make us functioning and happy members of society. So it's a really fortunate hexagram, I would have said. And it perhaps has two meanings. One meaning would be not to think about gaining more stuff. It's just appreciating what we have. It's easy to underestimate ourselves, to think that we haven't got what it takes, that we haven't got enough money, we're not earning enough money, we're not living in a good enough house, whatever these feelings of inadequacy might be. We have all these feelings, and what we can perhaps forget is that we do actually have a lot of things. And I suppose you could say at a most fundamental level, we have life. But if you're watching this, it's not just, I suppose, about being alive, although that shouldn't be discounted. The fact that we are alive, we are here, we exist, that's one possession we have. That is the most fundamental possession. And we have all these other things, all the things that we've learnt over the course of our lives. And we have talents, we have knowledge. Okay, we might have certificates, but you don't necessarily need a certificate to show that you've got knowledge. We have, yeah, sure, we may or may not have money in the bank. We may or may not have own property. That's just part of what possessions actually are. And the I Ching is really saying that it all needs to be harnessed. This is a time when we can actually harness what we already have and really benefit from it. So whatever the situation, you can benefit from everything you have. And yeah, it's not just about money. But there is a second meaning to this hexagram, which is sort of more mundane, and possession in great measure can be about the possibility of more possessions. Again, that's not necessarily about money. It could be making more friends. It could be gaining more experience, learning more things. But yeah, it could be about the possibility of making more money, gaining material possessions, things, property, whatever matters. But it's not just about money. I really do need to emphasize that. But it seems that we start off the day really well placed, I would have said, possession in great measure. And we really should be grateful for what we have and not think, we can't do this because we haven't got this, we can't do it. But actually we can do it. We've got all we need to be successful in our own individual terms. And I suppose success is all about what we have in front of us and what we're expected to do by the universe. The universe expects us to be successful in the way we are, using the cards we've been given, the cards we've been born with. But we have got what it takes. So there is kind of a bit of a harsh message here. Don't complain. You really do have what it takes. Now get on and do it. I mean, that is one way of looking at it. And we have the fifth line moving. And the fifth line, it's quite a sociable line. And it's telling us that we're able to win people over. So if we're in a situation where we need to gain people's trust, or if we're trying to persuade people to do things our way, or if we're just generally looking for new friends, new contacts, it seems that we can win people over. In one sense, just by being nice and being kind. But the I Ching is saying that is not enough. We have to make sure that when dealing with people, we maintain their respect. So the I Ching is then saying it is not enough to be nice and to be kind. Because if we're just nice and kind, people just take us for granted. And it's not going to work. We have to make sure that we are respected. And that is really important. And it says that we need dignity. We need to show dignity all the way along the line. And it's saying that when we have real dignity, then things really work for us. We don't have to lower ourselves. So, if we're desperate to get people on our side, we don't have to give them everything. We don't have to break our boundaries. We don't have to act in a way that what might lead to disrespect. We have to maintain our dignity. And of course, our dignity is part of one of our possessions. We have to maintain that. And if we can maintain our dignity, then other people are going to be a real benefit, and they're going to really help us make progress in whatever progress means in terms of our own individual situation. Now, because we have the fifth line moving, we move to a different hexagram, and we move to we move to hexagram number 1, which is the creative. Now, I mean, by the way, it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that today I wanted to talk about the stock market and astrology and markets and the astrology, and I get 14, possession in great measure. You know, it is the money hexagram. I know that's very brutal and crude, calling it the money hexagram. It's far more than that. But anyway, possession in great measure does move to the creative. The creative is the very first hexagram, and it is pure positivity. It's I always get yin and yang mixed up. It's yang, isn't it? Pure positivity. It's what we're creating, what we're putting out. It doesn't even have any form. It's just an impulse. It's a spark. And so from 14 is we get everything together, all of our possessions. Remember, possessions not just material possessions. It's everything we've got. And in the process, we may get people on our side, and then we can move to the next stage, which is being creative. We are actually able to make things happen. We are creating that first spark. And that spark, we shouldn't try to define it too much, because if you try to define the creative, in a way the creative gets weakened. The creative does not like to be defined. And so it is that creative impulse which can create an absolutely new situation. So we shouldn't even really think about where it might lead. It is just pure positivity. And it's about us having really quite a huge impact on the world, and we can really, make things happen. And we have to be careful here, because it is a very powerful hexagram. It is the raw creative force which can lead to anything. So I suppose at some stage we have to harness this force, but we don't want to weaken this force. Can you harness a dragon? Almost certainly not. Okay, that is the I Ching. And I now want to look at astrology and the markets and the stock market and that kind of thing. And I just must warn you that you shouldn't really take what I say too seriously. Because, it's really, really difficult. I mean, it's difficult to make money out of the markets anyway, but to use astrology, we might think we can do it, but in practice, it seems to me pretty dubious. And many try, but most fail. So I'm just giving you this sort of information about sort of from the perspective of general interest. It's of entertainment purposes, for entertainment purposes only. So how would you go about thinking about astrology and the markets? Well, I would have said that you keep it simple, don't you? And you start with Jupiter and Saturn. I mean, Jupiter and Saturn are the great chronocrators. They are the rulers of time. Jupiter and Saturn rule the business cycle. Jupiter is a planet of expansion, growth, progress, boom. Saturn is a planet of restriction, perhaps governments putting up interest rates, contraction, and perhaps recession as well. And so the interplay of Jupiter and Saturn is always important. And so, when you have a Jupiter-Saturn's conjunction, this can very much create a new business cycle. And you can watch this cycle develop. You can watch the cycle have its crises. You can watch these crises be resolved, and then you can see how they develop. And I've talked about previous Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. I mean, you look at the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction say in the year 2000. This happened in May 2000. If you remember, that started with the dot-com bust. May, just before the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the tech companies, their shares just collapsed in value over the course of 2000. It wasn't just in March 2000. As the year progressed, we had that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. It was bad to begin with. Then for the next couple of years, the market was just going nowhere, and it was declining. We had 9/11. Then, round about the time of the Gulf War, the 2003 Gulf War, the old maxim that you should buy the market as soon as war starts, and so then the market just continued through the stock prices rose through the 2000s, and until we started to come to towards the Jupiter-Saturn opposition, and then we had the bang. We had the Great Recession. So that can be the way it works. So always watch the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So for example, with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which was at in 2020. So let's actually look at that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So this is a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, December the 21st, 2020. So you could say, going back to 2000, you could say a similar thing. You could say, well, this was the start of a cycle, perhaps the start of a business cycle. This conjunction happened sort of December 21st, 2020, kind of in the middle of COVID. And so that was a sort of new beginning, COVID. And then you had the Ukraine war. And so, I don't know, but of course, remember, don't forget that the stock market and the economy are two very different things. Just because the stock market is going up doesn't mean that everything is fine with the economy. It very often isn't. I mean, if there's a recession, companies have to lay off workers, and so people might want to buy the company's shares because they're laying off workers because their expenses are lower. So, for example, this is the beginning of the cycle, and you might say, well, the stock market's going up, and maybe we can expect. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but you might say, well, we've had our wobbles. We've got over COVID. We got over the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war will eventually come to an end, and then we will move on to things will move on to something better. And after a bit of a crisis, then we'll be up and away. And I suppose at the moment, if you look at what's happening in the stock market is really high. I don't know whether you've noticed. It just keeps going up, and there may be a little bit of a crisis here. Remember, we've got Jupiter-Saturn square coming up. So this is, remember, so what I'm talking about at the moment so far is very general. I'm just talking about there is Jupiter square Saturn. That's coming up on August the 19th. So Jupiter square Saturn, if Jupiter square Saturn is about the business cycle, then Jupiter is at 1727 and Saturn is in Pisces, also at 1727. This is, of course, the first day of the Democratic National National Convention, DNC 2024. That's coincidental. It's also on the day of a full moon square Uranus. I don't know whether that's so important. Well, I think it is important, but symbolically, this might be a time of crisis when there's development of the economy and a business cycle and the markets in particular. They do go into a crisis because Jupiter is square Saturn. And I'm not going to tell you what the markets are going to do because I don't want to encourage people to, do one thing or another. But this may be a difficult time for the markets with Jupiter square Saturn around August the 19th. I mean, that is possible. And then maybe the Jupiter-Saturn square Saturn will resolve itself and things will just improve from then on. So Jupiter square Saturn cycle is important. And when you're dealing with stock market and astrology, it's one perhaps shouldn't be entirely obsessed with single dates. So if you look at 1987, October the 19th, 1987, there was a massive stock market crash. I think the stock market fell about 20% in a day or something like that. And that summer, 1987, Jupiter and Saturn were in sesquiquadrate. They were at 135 degrees apart. So this was a moment of the sesquiquadrate over the summer on August the 10th, 1987. So Jupiter was at 2936 Aries and Saturn was at 1436 Sagittarius. So they were 135 degrees apart. And 10 days after that, let me get it the right way around. If I go back to 1987. By the way, this is an ephemeris for 1950 to 2050. I mean, I know books are out of fashion, but if you don't have an ephemeris, I think you should have one. If you don't have one, you can rely on internet resources only up to a point. I don't think they're particularly expensive, but just having in paper the positions of the planets between 1950 and 2050 is just really important, I think. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned. But so if we look at 1987, August 1987, on the 19th of August 1987, on that day, Saturn went direct and Jupiter went retrograde on the same day, and they were pretty much exactly on the sesquiquadrate aspect. So I don't know what happened in terms of the markets on August the 10th, 1987, but it was just a sign, in a general sense, that something wasn't quite right, that there was a tension. Remember, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction started. We had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 1981. That was the beginning of that whole boom in the stock market in the United Kingdom. You had the Big Bang, where I think the stock market was freed up, and you had increasing computer trading starting to come in, but everyone started to get involved in the stock market. The stock market became more accessible to ordinary people, and so the 1981 was the Big Bang. Sorry, not the Big Bang. 1980. I think it's about 1986, 1985, mid 80s was the Big Bang in the UK, but 1981 was the start of a new cycle, and the stock market did really well through much of the 80s. But there was a crisis in 1987, symbolized by that Jupiter-Saturn sesquiquadrate. And again, just reminds us that we've really got to look at the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And it culminated in Black Monday. And this raises the question, could we have predicted Black Monday? A lot of people made a lot of money on Black Monday. A lot of people lost a lot of money on Black Monday. I think a lot of ordinary people in the UK, certainly in the UK, lost money because one thing that became popular in the 80s was this thing called spread betting, where you would bet on financial markets, and the way it worked would be that you would, the way spread betting works is that you would, for example, you might bet that for every dollar that the Dow Jones goes up, you will say make $10. But by the same token, every $10 it goes down, you owe them $10. or it might be $100. And so if the markets go completely against you, you could be bankrupt. People were bankrupted by sudden moves, with spread bets which just went wrong. And so that just emphasizes the whole speculative frenzy. And of course, in the 80s, you had the Japan frenzy when the Japanese economy was, everyone thought Japan was great. Again, people bankrupted themselves by overexposing themselves to Japan in the 1980s. But the Black Monday took place on October the 19th, 1987. And this was when, I don't know precisely what time, but there'd been a lot of selling over the weekend, and there was a lot of speculation. Plus you had computer, I believe you had computer trading coming in, and the computers were automatically doing stuff. And so you had a waterfall event. So the market was down, people sold, and in the end, on Black Monday, October the 19th, 1987, the market was, I think, was down something like 20%. And this event, Black Monday, has, I think, permanently scarred a lot of people. I know this was a long time ago, nearly 40 years ago, but I think certainly many people have, after this event, there's this sort of sense that it can happen. You can have the big one. On one day, the market can go 20%, can go 20% down. And this happens a lot in astrology. People talk about the big one, not just in astrology. We're all waiting for the big one. And all we have to do is isolate the big one, know when we're going to get the big crash. Then what we can do is we can use instruments like traded options to essentially bet, or spread betting, to bet on the market going down, because we've used our astrology to work out when this day actually is, and we're just going to get another Black Monday. And I think so many people, I think, were really influenced by Black Monday. I think they're still being influenced by Black Monday, to think that you can get a stock market crash happening on a single day. Reality is, stock markets don't usually crash on a single day. It's more complicated than that. They can take when the market started to fall in 2000 with the dot-com crash. It took couple of years to work its way through. So if you're trying to bet on a market crash, bets are very time sensitive. Like options have a limited time span. You spend money on the options. Yeah, you may be right. The market may crash, but it may not crash to the time scale you were thinking of. It may be much slower. So by the time it crashes, your options have expired and and it's gone. So as far as Black Monday is concerned, with Black Monday, Mercury went retrograde that weekend. So here is Mercury. You see Mercury's retrograde at 12 degrees, 1240, 1240, so it's 1240 Scorpio about then. So Mercury went retrograde that weekend. Now, you cannot possibly say that Mercury going retrograde is going to lead to a market crash, because Mercury goes retrograde the whole time. Now, it may be the case that if you perceive that the market is unstable, like in 1987, there were plenty of warnings. The market went down the previous Friday. So you might see the hints there that something is wrong. And as a result, you might then notice also that Mercury is retrograde. Of course, this is a 2020 hindsight. And you might think, that's it. Then what's going to happen is that Mercury retrograde is going to trigger it. So, I don't know, when did Mercury go retrograde? Mercury went retrograde on the 16th. So Mercury went retrograde on the 16th. So Mercury went retrograde 16. Well, actually on the Friday. So as the market was falling, as Mercury went retrograde the previous Friday, and so that's when you had the fall. Now, as far as what was happening astrologically on that day. You can see that Saturn's at 17 Sagittarius. I just got a strange sense of deja vu then. I don't know, it's as if I've done this before. I don't know, but in a sort of deja vu kind of way. But see, the Sun is opposition Jupiter. Now, again, Sun opposition Jupiter, not perhaps a big deal. I mean, the Sun has opposition Jupiter once a year, but perhaps if the market is looking unstable, the Mercury's just gone retrograde, and the Sun is opposition Jupiter, you might bring this all together, and perhaps the warning here that you can't do stock market astrology in isolation. You actually have to know about the markets. You have to be watching the markets. You're expecting something to happen, and then you use some astrological trigger to say, well, that's going to be the thing that does it. And in this case, perhaps it was Mercury retrograde, perhaps it was Sun opposition Jupiter, and okay, on this particular day, as the market opened, you had Moon square Saturn. So that might be how you do it. And I do remember this weekend really well, because if you're in the UK, there were hurricanes that weekend. It was really ominous. Trees got blown down. It was an incredible weekend in terms of the weather. And on the Saturday the 18th, I remember that particularly on the Saturday, I got my diploma from the Faculty of Astrological Studies that day, and I got it. I went to got my diploma in central London. Actually, my diploma was handed out by Liz Green, so I think I actually got to shake Liz Green's hand anyway. So that was Black Monday. Now, we're only looking at it from a geocentric perspective. Now, if you are really serious about astrology in the markets, you probably also have to consider it from a heliocentric view as well. So let's look at that chart heliocentrically. So I think serious market astrologers, they do tend to use heliocentric astrology. So looking at it heliocentrically, that Sun opposition Jupiter, by definition, has become an Earth-Jupiter conjunction. So when you have a planet conjunct Earth, it's sort of, particularly with Jupiter, Jupiter is like popping the bubble. This is it. This is the final thing. That's the final thing. And then you look at the cross aspects, and you see that there are actually quite a lot of cross aspects. Look at Mars. Mars is quincunx Earth. Mars is kind of quincunx Jupiter. And you've got Mars-Uranus square. And you've sort of got actually quite a lot going on heliocentrically. And so you can even throw in Chiron there. So Chiron opposition Uranus. But so you can see from a heliocentric view how you can actually get a stronger picture of what's happening heliocentrically than geocentrically. But I must emphasize, you cannot look at this in isolation. You have to have a good understanding of the markets, and even then it might not be good enough. So the Earth had made the conjunction to Jupiter sort of over the weekend. So that's when Earth-Jupiter, that's when it popped psychologically. And of course, the markets are all about psychology. So I think that the heliocentric picture for Black Monday certainly does help us understand what's going on. So it might be a good idea to consider a previous crash. Of course, the most famous crash, was the Wall Street crash on October the 29th, 1929. And remember that on Black Monday, Saturn was at 17 Sagittarius. On the Wall Street crash, Saturn was at 26 Sagittarius. 26 Sagittarius is approximately the degree of the galactic center, which astrologers often like to use. The galactic center. It's a very sensitive point, perhaps connected with the cosmos and what's going on. But Saturn it's a difficult time. Saturn on the galactic center. So, with the remember now thinking about the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. The Jupiter-Saturn cycle it started in around 1920, 1921. So you think of the Roaring Twenties. Starting with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, would have had a Jupiter-Saturn square in the 20s, and it finally goes into crisis with the opposition, which, okay, the opposition might have been exact in 1930 because Jupiter wasn't quite on the opposition, but still, from a sign-to-sign perspective, Jupiter's in Gemini, Saturn is in Sagittarius, and so this is when when the crash actually happened, and you might also notice Neptune. Neptune is in Virgo, Neptune in Leo, Roaring Twenties. It's everything is fine. Neptune in Leo, but as soon as Neptune moves into Virgo, the fantasy of the stock market, the fantasy of making money, Neptune, suddenly it's in Virgo. Hold on, is this real? Neptune in Virgo. Are these valuations real? Maybe they're not real. And it doesn't help. United States has Neptune in Virgo as well, so perhaps that had that helps sort of intensify it. So this emphasizes a point that if you're thinking about the stock market, you just have to consider the wider picture, and you can't just focus on little event. You've got to look at where is the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. What is Neptune doing? Neptune with the Black Monday. Neptune has just starting to go into Capricorn. Now, we were just getting used to Neptune in Capricorn. Neptune was fine. The market carried on going up after a while with Neptune in Capricorn. But Neptune in Capricorn is about reality to an extent. Like Neptune in Virgo, Neptune doesn't really work very well in Capricorn because it's just too focused on reality, on the material world. You can't really transcend with Neptune in Capricorn. So there are other things you can consider. I'm sort of running out of time, but for example, you might want to look at the horoscopes of particular institutions and events, like the birth of the New York Stock Exchange, which I think some people regard this as something called the Buttonwood Agreement on May the 17th, 1792. And so if this is a chart of the US stock market, then you might say, well, if you look at transits to this, because the US stock market is so prominent, then if you look at transits to this chart, maybe that will help you work out what's going to happen in the stock market. But I wouldn't have said you should just use this on its own. And so if we look at some examples, this is this is Black Monday, October the 19th on the outer wheel. On the inner wheel, we've got the supposed chart of the US stock market. There may be a few things to notice. The North Node was exactly conjunct the South Node. The nodes were exactly entwined with each other. North Node was conjunct the South Node. The transiting North Node was on the South Node. The transiting South Node was on the North Node. So that might be an example of how you might use transits. And I'm not saying that it's always going to work, but that's how you do it. You might say, okay, the Sun was at 25 Libra at the time of the Black Monday, and that was moving to a conjunction of Neptune. So, Oh, in fact, there you can see on Black Monday, there was a geocentric Sun opposition Jupiter, and that Sun opposition Jupiter was aspecting the Jupiter-Saturn opposition. So, in fact, the Buttonwood Agreement took place in 1792 with a Jupiter-Saturn opposition. So there's Jupiter opposition Saturn, maybe Moon opposition Jupiter, and Saturn opposition Neptune. So this opposition was being hit by the Sun-Jupiter opposition that was taking place at the time of Black Monday. So again, what you would do is you would perhaps use your knowledge of the market to say, well, this is a vulnerable time. I think this is a vulnerable time. This is a vulnerable window. So let's use astrology to work out where the actual trigger actually is. So finally, I just wanted to just look at what's happening now. Remember, I am absolutely not making any stock market predictions here. Jupiter-Saturn, and we've talked about Jupiter-Saturn. I pointed out that, on August the 19th, we do have Jupiter square Saturn. That could be quite tense for the markets, perhaps, but not just it's not just a one-off thing. It's just we perhaps could perhaps see this year, 2024, this summer with Jupiter square Saturn. This might be, the stock market has been going up a lot. So with Jupiter square Saturn, you might think, well, there might be some kind of crisis here, where we have to rethink it. Jupiter is about expansion, moving forward. Saturn is about reality. So you might want to consider that. And you might also want to consider events where something is going to happen. And for example, one big event in the financial calendar is a non-farm payrolls. So non-farm payrolls, it's usually, I think it usually takes place on the first Friday of every month. So first Friday of every month is when the US government provides data about how many jobs were created in the previous month. Obviously non-farm, but not agricultural jobs. So that's called the non-farm payrolls. And the markets can be very sensitive to this. And again, just to illustrate the difference between a recession, between what's happening in a real economy, Wall Street and Main Street, very often what the markets like to see is not so many jobs being created. Because when the market sees not so many jobs being created, they're thinking, well, that's good because it means that there's more pressure on the Federal Reserve to reduce interest rates. So, in fact, a supposedly bad figure from non-farm payrolls can actually be good for the market because if less pressure to reduce interest, to increase interest rates, because, hold on, how does that work? If you see a bad results, that means the Federal Reserve can't raise interest rates. It might actually have to reduce interest rates, and also that might have a negative impact on the dollar. And very often, when the dollar gets negatively impacted, that has an impact can have a favorable impact on the market. So these non-farm payrolls are a big event every month. And so this Friday, which is August the 2nd, we're going to get non-farm payrolls for July, because it's going to be the first Friday in August. And so when the non-farm payrolls are released, then you can get dramatic swings in the market. The market might move dramatically to anticipate them. And then of course, the non-farm payrolls are produced at 8:30 in the morning, an hour before Wall Street opens. But the currency markets, commodity markets can still respond to non-farm payrolls. So looking at non-farm payrolls, we can actually potentially set up a chart for non-farm payrolls. So this is set for, I set it for New York, maybe I should set it for Washington, I don't know, but this is August 2nd, 2024, which is a Friday, and this is the moment when non-farm payrolls are come out. So you might look at this chart and you might say, how is the market? How are people going to respond to the non-farm payrolls? And you might say, well, this is interesting because we got Venus making an exact sextile to Uranus. Sorry, exact square to Uranus. That looks a bit unstable. Uranus is on fairly close to Algol. So Venus is perhaps triggering Uranus. I'm not going to go into detail. I just want to give you the idea of how you might look at an event like the non-farm payrolls. And it's also interesting that this is on a Friday, you've got a new moon coming up just after the non-farm payrolls, waning moon, and on the following Monday, you've got Monday the 5th, you've got Mercury going retrograde. So you've got a pile up of events coming up over next weekend. You've got non-farm payrolls, you've got new moon, plus you've got Venus square Uranus, plus you've got Mercury retrograde. So it will be interesting to see how the markets respond to the non-farm payrolls. I mean, they always respond quite dramatically, not always, but very often there are strong movements as a result of non-farm payrolls. But I don't want to make any predictions. I mean, this channel is really about astrology, and it's not about money. It's not about giving financial advice. Anything I say about money is for entertainment purposes only. But yeah, it will be interesting to see what non-farm payrolls actually, how the market responds to them. And that's it. As you can see, you can certainly try to use astrology to make sense of the markets, but I do think that you actually have to be very careful. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much for listening to me. Now, if you found this video useful, I would be very grateful if you were to like it, and if you are not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.